just gently tug on those reins, and that horse would have slowed down and stopped. But she didn't know how to control the horse, like a lot of us don't know how to control our mouth. And I hope there's no perfect people in here. And as I look around, I can't judge because I don't know how you are. You're all sweet and wonderful here. But myself, I can be quick with my tongue. The blessing is, as soon as I get through talking to my wife, I quieten down and say, I'm sorry. That's the whole point of this whole study is we have to put our mind in charge. That's hard to do, isn't it? You remember I talked last time about we hear a lot about the heart. We hear a lot about the spirit and the mind. And sometimes as Christians we get that all confused because in some scriptures we feel like the scriptures talk when it calls it the heart, thinking with the heart, we get a little confused. My philosophy is that what runs us most of the time? Our mind. Right now some of you's mind may be wandering away from what I'm talking about, or you may be thinking of what I'm talking about, but you're wandering off somewhere else. Well, that mind, it's not easy to control, is it? It does things to us. It leads us sometimes. And when this mind kicks in gear, like when it comes to lust or something our mind sees to do, then if it was just the mind, it'd be hard to control, wouldn't it? So where the Spirit comes in, the Spirit of God, is when the mind conceives something that's wrong. We're, as Christians, supposed to let the Spirit take charge and quelch those desires. Now the heart is the place that we take these thoughts and plant them, and we let them grow, because the heart is really who we are. Because the Spirit of God is not always in us, is it? Does anybody maintain that the Spirit of God is always in you? If it were, you would be a holy vessel. So the Spirit of God is not always in us, because the Spirit of God, we allow the Spirit of God to control us, right? If we don't allow the Spirit of God to rule us, then everything else runs amok. Our mind runs away with trash we shouldn't be thinking about. Then we plant the seeds in our hearts from the mind, and then when the seeds take root in the heart, we still have to fight it with the Spirit. And if we've walked away from the Spirit, then we're not able. Because if we don't maintain the Spirit of God in us, we can't control anything coming from without us. Does everybody grab what I'm talking about? Okay. Any comments? That's the first time my daughter's ever shook her head yes to something I said. We read James 3-6. James is talking about the tongue being the nasty part of us that creates a lot of trouble for us. And we can all sit right here and think about things we've said with our mouth that created a lot of garbage in our lives, in other people's lives. sometimes the very way we talk to our kids. So, the power of the tongue. Before I get into my notes, let me just throw it out. As you sit there and think about the tongue, what are some of the powers that it has over you, over others, over life? See, it's more fun for me if you teach this class. Yeah. Power of tongue as far as eating and swallowing. Yeah. And if we didn't have a tongue, you can't talk without it. But go back and forth to some of the good things, some of the bad things the tongue can do. Think of some and just shoot them at me. It definitely can. How? Things you say to people. Okay. Things you say to people. Yeah. The exact opposite. She said it could build people up. You can make people feel good with the tongue. You can totally destroy them with the tongue. So, yes, and a lot of in-betweeners, isn't there? Yes, you can. You can destroy yours by saying things you shouldn't have said, and you can destroy others' reputations by things you say about them that may or may not be true. Because we don't know what's the old saying about being a fool. Keep your mouth shut and let the world think you're a fool. Open your mouth and remove all doubt. Yeah. So, yes, it is true. What are you saying? Okay. Well, the tongue can be destructive. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 10. We're going to spend a lot of time in Proverbs. As you've noticed, I teach a little differently than Craig does because I like to deal with the concepts of what we're talking about. Craig likes to cover the scriptures one at a time and talk about those. I guess in learning Spanish years ago, Spanish is a language, it's a conceptual language. You speak in ideas. The English language is not an idea language. It's like I tell my wife all the time. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Women are really good at saying, you know what I mean. I don't have to know what you mean. Just tell me what you mean. But don't feed her. Don't feed her. The Spanish language is a conceptual language, and until you learn that, you're not going to learn the Spanish language very well, because you're talking about concepts and not attaching a bunch of words together to create a thought. Chapter 10, verse 19. When words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver, but the heart of the wicked is of little value. Now notice how Solomon, whoever wrote this, we suspect Solomon wrote most of this. Notice how right at the end he throws the heart in. So, and what is the... what is the scripture that talks about out of the mouth flows the abundance of the heart? So Solomon wisely throws this in right at the last, because a lot of times what I'm feeling in here, I'm going to spit out at you at one time or another. It may not be in just casual conversation. It may be when when I jacked my truck up and it fell off the jack. That's not casual conversation. So out of the mouth flows the abundance of the heart. And when you're mad at somebody, sometimes you say things you don't even mean. But we seem to pull this sword out and slash and cut with it, when it would be better just to keep your mouth shut. But it's really hard, when you're angry or when you're hurt. Isn't it one of the most difficult things in the world to keep your mouth shut? I feel like if I get upset with Tina, I feel like I need to go out in the pasture and just beat a tree up or something. But oh no, I've got to stay there and say my piece. And bless her heart, she never says a word. She just keeps her mouth shut and doesn't cook for 3 weeks. Yeah, really. All right, tell me something that the tongue does that really messes up the world. Oh, come on. What is one of the destructive things that the tongue does in our lives that really messes up the world? One of the most difficult things I've ever dealt with in raising my kids was teaching them not to lie. Have you found that to be true, raising yours? Because if they lie and get away with it, it worked for them. So how can the old saying, how can you argue with success? If they lied to you and everything's great and they get away with it, hey, that worked great. No whipping, I'm not in trouble, things are good. One of the most difficult things I ever faced raising kids is to teach them that it's not good to lie. So the only way I could figure it out, and I don't know if it ever worked, my daughter could attest to it, I don't know, but I tried to never lie to my kids, because they can lie to you 1,000 times and you still try to figure out why and how. But if you lie once to them, that's more destructive, isn't it? Why is lying necessarily destructive to ourselves? Well, that's true. It'll come back on you. That's true. You cover up a lot of trash, don't you? What if every other word I said to you, you could prove was a lie? Would you ever believe anything I said? No. Do you know people that people say, take everything he says with a grain of salt, because you'll have something worthwhile, and that's the grain of salt. So if we lie, we destroy our own reputations, our own worth, because people don't trust us and they don't believe us. And the real way to put that to sleep is when you tell the truth about yourself. Because they say, well, if he told the truth about that, he'd tell the truth about anything. So sometimes cutting your legs out from under yourself actually builds you up in other people's esteem. What's another way that lying destroys? Gossip. We tell things that maybe not be true about someone else, because we always do that to make ourselves look better, don't we? I saw Mark Short coming out of the beer joint last night. Bald-faced lie. Huh? Was I going in and he was going? Well, I'm mad at Mark, and I want you to think bad of him and good of me. So, if you find out that that's a lie, then I've destroyed myself. I've destroyed myself in your eyes. If you find out that it's the truth, then you call me a gossip, and you might think less of Mark. You didn't realize that he was in there trying to save a soul. That's true. And I've planted a seed in your heart about Mark Short. Now, I was at home all evening yesterday with my kids and my grandkids, and I wasn't anywhere that I could see Mark coming or going. This man can live it down. I don't know anything bad about him, but I could talk to Kay. He immediately pointed to Kay. She said that she had a friend that would rather make up a lie that sounds better than to tell the truth. And my daddy used to say about about people that was a liar, he'd say that man would rather climb a tree and lie than stay on the ground and tell the truth. And I've known people like that. I've known people like that. Well, lying and deceit comes along with lying is number one. In Proverbs 12:22 says that it's an abomination to God. Now we see this, this word's not used a whole lot throughout the Bible, but it seems to always be used when it's attributing to God how he feels about something we do wrong. So what does this word abomination indicate to you when you hear it about God? Not only mad, but sick at his stomach, It's, he talks about being lukewarm. It makes you want to spit you out. And there's a few things throughout the Bible that says it's an abomination to God. And I think lying's always in there. Well, because God hates it. Yeah. Now, we can trust that God has never lied to us, can't we? Because what about God? Is he capable of lying? That's strange, isn't it? I mean, it's not strange because we know God, but I mean, to think that there's a being somewhere after we've lived down here with all of us beings and run across people you can't trust. It's difficult to think about the fact that our God cannot lie. Have you ever thought about this? God is love, right? We're told that. That's what he's all about. He's all about caring. It's all about Ron Sanders caring about John and everybody else. That's what God's all about. He cared so much for us that he was willing to go through all that trouble to send his son down here. Excuse me. It's allergy season, He sent his son down here to not only just suffer on the cross, but suffer as he taught. He was put down and criticized constantly, all out of love. Now the flip side, Satan. Have you ever thought about the fact that Satan has no concept of love? He doesn't understand it. It's not part of his being. And as goofy as us humans get to be sometimes, and some of the things we do, we all still have that little essence of love inside us, right? You can take the meanest, ugliest alcoholic in the world, but let him get a little bit sober and come home to his kids, and he loves his kids. So there's always that little fire brewing inside us. Even if we're sinners, even if we've left God far behind, that little fire is still burning about how we feel about somebody else, how we feel about decent people. Why is it there? Somebody else besides me? Tell me. She says God, because we are of God, we have the Spirit of God. That's that Spirit. And since God is love, then the Spirit of God is all about love. And that's who we are. That's who we should be. And if we absorb ourselves in that concept of love and caring about other people, man, doesn't that make life a lot better? You know? Some of you come in here and I hug you and squeeze you and kiss you. I even kiss men on the cheek. Don't I, Mark? Rick has even mentioned that from the pulpit. But it's because I love you. You know, these people that meet here and throughout the world that care about God and I know care about me. You know, Sunday is a highlight in my life to get to be with people I know believe and think the same things I do. Not about everything. You and I don't agree on everything, do we? Yes, we do. So that's where that little fire comes from inside us. That's the part of God that keeps urging us on, even the bad guys. I saw an episode recently of some prisoners with the Bibles being brought to the prisons and some teaching. Hardcore murderous criminals with tears running down their face. That's that little fire of God burning inside them. Now, whether they let that seed grow or not, I don't know. That documentary didn't cover that much. But that's that little fire of love inside us. So the other side of that coin is if we start quelching that fire, the things we do become an abomination to God. Why do we lie? Well, we don't like somebody else and we want them to look bad and us look better. Lying always comes to no good end. Proverbs 17:20. Now here's something that I hadn't thought about with the tongue. Flattery. Why could flattery be wrong? If we use our tongue to flatter somebody else. Well, yeah, if you're lying about it and saying, yeah, you're the hottest thing I've ever seen. I didn't mean that to reflect on Jan. Timing's everything, folks. You do have a mirror? Amen. John is getting political. But he's right. You know, everybody says, what is wrong with this country? You and I know full well what's wrong with this country. This country has turned its back on God and Jesus Christ. That's what's wrong with this country. The majority of people in charge of this country have no concept of where they ought to be spiritually. And that's what's wrong with this country. I'd like to think I could be the big hero to to go do something about it. But if I went to Washington and started preaching Jesus, I'd just be another idiot on the corner. Not in truth, but as far as everybody else is concerned. Huh? It is very distressing. It is very distressing. And that's why you and I are called the salt of the earth. We still make a difference. Well, Jan's right. If we lie about flattering somebody, we probably have an angle, don't we? Mark, you've got the nicest lake house I've ever seen. Is it still yours? Okay. You got the nicest lake house I've ever seen. Someday I'd like to come out and use that lake house because it's so pretty. You say, no. He's not buying into my flattery. Okay. But that's where the tongue and flattery fails us and displeases God. If I use flattery for some reason to purport myself. We've already covered gossip. Of course, slandery and backbiters are all fit into that category. We betray and we destroy friendships. Have you ever lost a good friend because of them not being honest with you or you not being honest with them? We create strife. We destroy character and integrity. And sometimes, isn't that all we've got left? Is our integrity? Isn't that what makes us feel good about ourselves? In truth, you know, I can go out like Trevor Brazil and win roping championships, but sooner or later I'm going to have to come to grips. And I'm not saying Trevor is off key. I'm just saying if I did all that, sooner or later that's going to be worth nothing. Because if I'm not who I like inside, then everything I do on the outside comes to naught, doesn't it? Cursing. Now this, the Bible mentions profanity, but when we talk about cursing, we're talking about what? Essentially putting a curse on another person, Now, I can use profanity to curse you, really, but I can curse you without profanity, and that's not good to me. The word hell in itself is not a bad word. It's mentioned so many times here. But if I tell Greeley to go to hell and mean it, that ain't good. That ain't good. Andrew Connolly one time was on an airplane. I may have told this class this story, but he was on an airplane traveling somewhere to do a gospel meeting, and he was studying for his sermons. And there was a guy, so-called atheist, next to him, and he kept looking at him and having short conversations. And then he finally said, "Do you really believe that trash?" And Andrew Connolly says, "Well, I don't see it as trash." And he had a long discourse with him. And so they flew a little further, and Andrew was studying. The guy looked over and said, "That's just pure garbage." So Andrew took it to task to start telling him good things about the Lord and how it all works. And they talked for a few minutes. Then they got quiet again. Andrew went on studying. And finally the guy says, "I just don't get it, a man like you believing trash like that." And Andrew looked at him and said, "Well, I believe it and you don't. So would you please be quiet and go to hell on your own?" I guess in that moment he was right. If the guy pursued that type of thinking, he was going to go there. So what about using the tongue for good stuff? Really good stuff. That's what we should be doing all the time, right? Good words are pleasing to those who hear. If I tell you did a good thing and you did, you feel better about yourself. And every person that tells you did a good thing, you feel even I started to say more better. I can say that. You even feel more better about yourself as you go on. Now that's not flattery, is it? You find something good about somebody and you tell them about it. Chapter 10, where we are right now, verse 11. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but violence overwhelms the mouth of the wicked. Hatred stirs up dissension, but love covers over all wrongs. Wisdom is found on the lips of the discerning, but a rod is for the back of him who lacks judgment. So, we can use our lips to make life better for other people, can't we? Now, a while ago I mentioned the word, I said timing's everything. But timing is everything. Sometimes it counts when you say something more than how you say it. So how do we deal with this thing? Let's talk about some people who have used their mouth to create some real havoc. Anybody name one that the world knows? Hitler. That's all he had was going for himself, wasn't it? Was his mouth. He preached destruction to a race of people. Probably, yes ma'am. Who? Jim Jones? Yeah. Took a lot of people with him for his own personal private cause. And I never have been able to understand how David Koresh and Jim Jones and these guys can claim to have a hold on righteousness and cause so much destruction. Permanent destruction. Eternal destruction. That's true. That's true. She said they believe their own lies so long that they live them. That's, he's making a play on words. He's making a play on words. Mary. Yep. So all of those things are an outpouring of evil mouths. He was talking about people selling deep freezers to the Eskimos. I guess if they keep the house warm, Thomas, they might need one indoors, but they don't have to, do they? They just leave everything hanging outside. Exactly. Who else besides Hitler can you think of? And David Koresh, Jim Jones. Yeah, and that's what Thomas was touching on, preaching things that aren't scriptural, or taking things scriptural and twisting them to teach them to serve your own private purposes. So the tongue is creating evil that way. Oh, we've already mentioned our politicians. We won't get too heavy on them. I suspect there are a couple of good guys in Washington. They just can't carry the load, you know. But you do realize, don't you, that members of the Church of Christ are some of the worst voters in the world. And maybe that's a good thing, because because there's been times when I said, I trust God. I don't need to make a difference at the polls. I trust God. Everything's going to be the way he wants it to be. But on the other hand, maybe he wants Ron Sanders to try to make a difference. But statistically, we're some of the worst voters in the world. She says it makes it difficult to vote when you don't have anybody good to vote for. Just hang on. Yeah. But how many of us take the trouble to find out how they voted? I have no idea how, and I'm slapping myself in the face. I have no idea how the people I voted for that are in Washington have voted on some of the issues. I haven't taken the trouble to find out. Shame on me. Thanks, Thomas. Well, I haven't done that. Pot of gold or a can of worms? Yeah. And I haven't gotten on the internet to find out. Well, see, we do that. We do that as Christians more than we involve ourselves in politics. We depend on God, and we do, for the most part, study. We don't see what the other side's doing, like Ron Sanders doesn't check my representative and senator's voting record. Yes, ma'am. Are you trying to flatter Ed? He's sitting behind you. Well, that's worthwhile, Ed. Well, and that boils down to the same thing I said a while ago. This country, including us, has pretty much turned its back on God. And we realize, but a lot of the country doesn't realize because they don't pay any attention, what has happened to countries and peoples all through history that has turned their back on God. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you earlier, when you say statistically, Church of Christ is some of the worst voters, I wanted to understand that a little better.
I said Church of Christ, Christian believers are some of the worst voters.
Worst.
We don't turn out.
Don't vote.
Don't vote, yeah. No, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, we don't vote. We don't go to the polls. So. Well, there's no, Proverbs 26 says, where there's no wood, the fire burns out. So if we keep our mouth shut, we don't start little fires like James is talking about. And I used to really like John Wayne because he was a strong, silent type. But as much as I like John Wayne and Jesus Christ, I have never learned to be silent. I've never been strong, but I've never learned to be silent. I try. The Lord knows I try. So what are you grinning about, Kate? The other side of the tongue story is the power of the ear. And what's the scripture? Be swift to hear, slow to speak. That's the way we need to practice it. Now, you and I wouldn't have much fellowship if we were slow to speak and we're all just listening. I got something to say to you, and I want to hear what you've got to say, but only after I say it, okay? Okay. Well, thank you for your input. You'll get Craig back here next week.